Hello and welcome. I'm Allison Markin Powell. I translate Japanese and I'm a member of PEN America's Translation Committee, and I represent the committee on PEN's Board of Trustees. I'm happy to welcome you to Love and Language featuring Keiichiro Hirano and Juliet Winters Carpenter. I'd like to thank Japan Foundation Los Angeles for sponsoring this event. And on behalf of PEN America, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. And I'd like to invite the audience to engage in the following ways. This event will be live captioned, so please see the link in the chat. This event will also be interpreted by Stacy Smith. So thank you, Stacy, for your efforts tonight. I'd like to encourage the audience to engage in the chat. If you have a question, you can click on, there's an Ask a Question link below, and we'll have a more formal Q&A towards the end of the conversation, but I encourage you to send in your questions throughout. Get them in early. Don't wait until the last minute, because then it's hard to get to everyone's questions, and we'll try and work them into discussion. So I'm so pleased to be here today, especially because this event really speaks to the spirit of the World Voices Festival, showcasing international literature and bringing us voices from around the world, and we hear them in different languages. So we're very fortunate to have with us the author and the translator to discuss this novel at the end of the matinee and to discuss Japanese literature in and out of translation. Keiichiro Hirano was born in Gamagori in Aichi Prefecture in Japan. He published his first novel, Nishoku, in 1998 and won the Akutagawa Prize the next year as one of the youngest winners ever at 23 years of age. He graduated from the law department of Kyoto University in 1999, and in 2005, he was nominated as a cultural ambassador and spent a year in France. At the end of the matinee, Matinee no Owari ni was published last month by Amazon Crossing, who also published his novel, A Man, Aru Otoko, last year. Juliet Winters Carpenter is a renowned translator of Japanese literature. She was born in the American Midwest, and she lived in Japan for over 45 years before moving back to Whidbey Island in Washington State. Juliet has won numerous awards for her translations from Japanese and has translated dozens of books, including novels by Kobo Abe and several by Minae Mizumura, long thought too difficult to translate, and my favorite, Masks by Fumiko Enshi. At this year's World Voices Festival, participants are providing visual descriptions of ourselves. I'm going to go first. I'm Allison, so I'm a cisgender white woman with long brown hair. I'm wearing a lace shirt and glasses. I'm also wearing a necklace with a wire hanger charm as a political statement. My pronouns are she and her. Hirano-san and Juliet, would you like to provide a visual description of yourself?
はい。よろしくお願いします。まず、ちょっと質問にお答えする前に、今日はお招きいただきましてありがとうございました。ペンアメリカの皆さん、それから国際交流機関の皆さんに本当に感謝しています。それからもちろん、今日聞いてくださっているアメリカの皆さんにお目にかかれることを本当に嬉しく思っています。まあ本当だと、アメリカに行って直接お目にかかりたいんですけども、まあ、残念ながらコロナでこういう状況ですので、でもこういう形でもお話できるってことに、まあ希望を抱いてますので、まあポジティブに考えてます。で、まあ僕自身は、まあ髪はちょっとちょっと茶色っぽい黒ぐらいですかね。まあ肌の色は、まあアジア的な色ですけども、なんていうのかな。背は176センチ、7センチぐらいですかね。まあ、外観的な特徴は、まあそんなところです。で、まあ代名詞は彼でお願いします。
Hello. Before answering your question, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity and to be invited to today's event. I'd like to thank PEN America as well as Japan Foundation Los Angeles. I feel very appreciative. Of course, if we didn't have Corona, I would actually be there in person. We could be gathering in person, but I think gathering here online is second best, and I'm extremely happy to be able to have this opportunity with everyone here. In terms of my descriptors, I have brownish black hair. My skin color, I'd say, is Asian skin color. My height is about 170 centimeters, and my pronoun is he, him.
Juliet?
My name is Juliet Winters Carpenter. I've been a translator most of my life, and it's just a delight for me to be around people who are interested in translation and reading literature from other countries. So I'm really happy to be here. I have to describe myself. Oh dear. I see from this picture my hair is really white now. It's whiter than I had expected. And I have big glasses on, and I have white skin. What else?
If you want to talk about what you're wearing.
Oh, I'm wearing a black top with sort of an Indian shawl around it.
Great.
That's
Thanks.
me.
Thanks so much. This makes it we're just trying to make it as accessible as possible. So before we get into the conversation, though, I was going to try and give a brief summary of this novel. Uchida-san from Japan Foundation LA gave some of the descriptions about it, but at the end of the matinee, it's a star-crossed love story between Satoshi Makino, who is a classical guitarist, and Yoko Komine, who is a journalist based in Paris, who does stints in Iraq. The bulk of this novel takes place in the late aughts. So Makino and Yoko, they meet after one of his concerts in Tokyo. She joins the group of people who are going to a restaurant afterwards, and the two of them connect over dinner. They have this long conversation, which they then sort of continue their conversation and their engagement over email and Skype, deepening their connection until it's solidified when they reunite in Paris. And you can imagine it's the crescendo. But then before their next meeting, when they plan to meet in Tokyo, fate intervenes and their lives take different paths. So I don't like to give too much information. I don't like to give too much away. So, but at the end of the matinee is a meditation on personal relationships and life choices, on music and film and art and literature, and on trauma and recovery. So my first question that I'd like to put to both Hirano-san and to Juliet is about genre and the divisions that exist in Japanese and in English language publishing, which don't necessarily match up with each other. In Japan, the broadest division is between what's called Junbungaku and Taishu Bungaku, and it's like pure, well, it's literary fiction basically, and a more commercial, or what they refer to as like entertainment fiction. And it's kind of difficult to, figure out who fits into which category, but Hirano-san, by nature of, at the age of 23, being awarded the Akutagawa Prize, he automatically gets put into the literary fiction category. But so I was wondering, Hirano-san, what's your experience, as you've been translated into other languages, that, well, we don't only have to talk about English translation. And then I'd like to hear from Juliet too, like, what's your opinion of these classifications?
So純文学と、エンターテインメント文学っていうのが日本で分かれてるっていうのは昔から批判もありまして、実際にそんなに綺麗に分けることもできないですし、僕自身も SF だとか、ミステリーとかの影響を部分的に受けた小説も書いてますが、僕の作品は基本的には純文学作品というふうに認識されています。それで、やっぱり学校教育でも日本の近代文学の歴史っていうと、純文学の作家を中心に教えられるということが今でも続いています。ただそれは変わってくるかもしれません。で、もっと具体的に言うと、日本には文芸誌と言われる文学の雑誌がたくさんあるんですが、その中でかなりはっきりと純文学系の雑誌はこちら、エンターテインメント系の雑誌はこちらというのは決まっていて、それぞれの雑誌がそれぞれに賞を主催してるんですね。そうしますと、純文学系の雑誌の賞には純文学系の小説が、応募され、あるいはノミネートされて賞を取る。エンターテインメント雑誌の、に載ってる作品は、エンターテインメント系の賞を受賞するというふうに、分けられていくことになってるんですが、ただ、一人の作家がどっちの雑誌でも書くということもありますし、あの人があっちの賞を取るべきだったのに、純文学系の賞を取るべきだったのに、大衆文学の賞を取った。代表的なのは芥川賞というと直木賞という2つの賞がありますが、それがど どっちの賞を取るべきかっていうのを迷うケースもありますんで、まあ、弊害もいろいろあると思います。ただ、まあ、ミステリーとか、まあ、ノワールとか SF とかっていうのは、エンターテインメント系の小説というふうにジャンル分けされることが多いんですが、まあ、繰り返しますけど、純文学系の作家でもその影響を受けている人もいますし、今はやっぱりカテゴライズするっていうこと自体に対する批判もかなりあると思います。
So as you said, in Japan, we do have these two categories of junbungaku and entertainment. This is something that's been criticized from the past extensively, because you can't really neatly divide between the two categories. It's not a clean line. And speaking for myself, I actually have influence from a variety of genres, whether it's science fiction, mystery. This is reflected in some of my works, although I do understand, or I have awareness, that I'm often categorized as this junbungaku. In terms of our academic environment, up until now and recently, we primarily learn about authors who are in the Jun Bungakushu category. This might change going forward, but this is how it has been and how it still is. And then in terms of, we have many literary journals in Japan, and those actually tend to be pretty differentiated as well. Within those, there's a clear division between the Jun and the entertainment one. There's also awards given out by these magazines, and within those, there would be a category whether you would be given the entertainment one or the Jun Bungaku award. So that you would think that would be a clear differentiation, but a lot of times a certain author can be both categories. They don't fit into one or the other, and they might be awarded something where people would say, oh, they really should have gotten the other award, or one or the other. The two representative awards are the Akutagawa show, which I had received, and the Naoki award. Those are the two different categories that would be the prime examples of that. So I think that in some cases this differentiation can have a harmful effect, because, as I said, I can fall into the mystery, the science fiction, the entertainment genres. It's not as clear cut. There's many different categories out there.
一つだけ事例を加えたいんですが、日本でドストエフスキーが最初に翻訳された頃、特に罪と罰という小説が翻訳された時にまあ非常に哲学的に深遠な小説ですが、体裁としてはミステリー小説に近いので、一体これは純文学なのか大衆小説なのかっていうようなことが真面目に議論されたことがありました。まあそれを決めることにあまり意味のあった議論だとは思わないんですが、まあそういった事例がありました。
I can just add an example, a concrete example that might illustrate this. When Dostoevsky was first translated in Japan, this is for Crime and Punishment, there was a bit of a debate as to which category the novel would fall into. It was clearly philosophical, but it also had mystery aspects as well. So there was a debate, should it be Junbungaku, should it be entertainment? And I don't think that there really was much relevance to the way that this was debated or decided, but it just gives you a sense of the division there.
Juliet, actually, can I just say one quick thing, Stacey, for the captioner, if you could slow down just a little bit so that we have a live captioner. We're fortunate tonight, so we have lots of options. But Juliet, what do you think about these? First we're talking about these two categories, and what do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's pretty strange, actually. I'm not sure that it's useful. The Japanese themselves can't tell the difference between them. What does it mean to be pure? Something that's purely literary, then it's not entertaining at all. That doesn't sound very fun. I'm not sure I want to read that. But if it's just entertaining and written for people with lowbrow inclinations who don't like literature, I don't want to read that either. So I'm not sure I would personally, as a writer, want to be in either category.
Well, so talking about genre, Hirano-san would mention that he draws from various genres when he's writing his novels, but this book in particular has been called an adult romance. So what motivated you to write a romance novel, or why did you choose romance as a theme?
そうです。まあ、愛っていうのは僕の小説の中でずっといろんな形でテーマになってきてはいるんですけれども、この小説を書くときに関しては、特に、まあ、正直日本の政治状況とか社会状況に僕はくたびれ果てたんですね。もう震災後、まあ、経済的にも非常にダメージがありましたし、国内でナショナリズムとか排外主義っていうのが勃興していて、それについて日常的に政治的な批判などを行っていましたし、まあそれは必要なことだと思いますけど、まあ正直現実自体にくたびれ果てていて、何か小説を読んでる間だけは一種の高揚感を得られるような、解放感を得られるような物語っていうのを必要としていたんですね。で、その中で、やっぱり、人間と人間の関係の中での愛っていうものが、この分断と対立の時代に非常に重要なんじゃないかというふうに思ったことが一つでした。で、日本語には、まあ、恋愛って言葉がありまして、恋と愛っていう二つの言葉がくっついてるんですね。で、僕はそれを概念的に少し区別してまして、恋っていうのは短期的に非常に燃え上がって、相手と結ばれたいっていうふうに強く感じる感情で、愛っていうのはそれに対してもっと関係の継続性が重視される言葉なんですね。ですから親子愛っていうことは言いますけど、親子恋とは言わなくて、なぜなら親子のその関係の継続性が前提とされていて、一時的に激しく燃え上がる感情ではないので、そういうふうに人間と人間の関係性の継続ってことを考えたときに、愛っていう概念が非常に重要なんじゃないかと思いまして、この2人の、会った回数は少ないけれども、長い年月の間、特別な関係を維持した男女について書くときに、まあ、愛について考察すべきだというふうに思いました。
So when it comes to love, this theme has actually been in many of my novels in several different forms. But in terms of this novel, I honestly was just sick and tired of the political and social situation in Japan. After the earthquake, we had a lot of economic difficulties. There were displays of nationalism, xenophobia, many different aspects. Every day the politics was being criticized. I was really looking for a way to escape the reality of what's going on, to provide an escape from the reality of what's going on that could give readers a sense of release and perhaps even a bit of exhilaration. So in light of that, I was thinking that it would be good to depict a story of love among people in this time of division and conflict. I thought that might be a balm to these troubled times. In Japanese, when we talk about romance, it's ren-ai, and it's comprised of two characters. One is for koi and one is for ai. When we think of koi, this is more of the, I differentiate between the two. And when I think of koi, I think of this as more of the sort of short-term, really passionate, burning, strong love or romance. And when I think of I think of this more as a more durable love, one that's going to be more long-term, but perhaps not as passionate. Just to give you an example of the differentiation, we will refer to when we talk about parental love between a parent and a child, we use the word I, this longer, more durable love. We wouldn't say koi for that kind of love because presumably it's not something that's short-term and very passionate. It's going to be long-term, more stable, more durable. So I thought for this novel as well, I wanted to depict something between two people, this long-term love. This would be an important concept for the novel. The premise is that the two only meet a few times, but the amount of the duration of their relationship takes place over it's longer, and it's between a man and woman who are able to maintain their special relationship over this longer period of time, which is why I thought this aspect of I was important to be the focus of the novel, this love.
Music also plays a pivotal role in this novel. You might even say that music is another language that comes through in the text. So Hirano-san, can you speak about why you chose to use music as such an important part of this story? And I'd like to ask Juliet, because I know you have quite a musical background yourself. I would like to ask you if you could talk about how it is to translate so many descriptions of music, because I myself find it really difficult even to what did that involve for you? So Hirano-san first.
はい。まあ僕は音楽本当に好きで、自分でもピアノやギターを弾いたりするんですけれども、まあ本読む以外で 僕は人生の中で最も幸福感を感じるのは音楽を聴いてる時で、特に音楽家っていう人たちに対してはもう絶大な憧れがあって、いろいろな人が僕の本を読んで楽しんでくれるのは嬉しいんですけど、特にミュージシャンが僕の本を気に入ってくれた時には特別に嬉しいんですね。それで、先ほど言ったように何かこうもう現実に疲れていて、自分の非常にこう好きな世界を描きたいと思った時に、実は2000年の前半にフレデリック・ショパンというフランスのポーランドとフランスの、ミックスの音楽家について書いた小説がありました。で、それはショパンともう一人ドラクロワという画家について書いた小説なんですけども、でその彼らの人生と作品について書いた小説は僕にとっても非常にこう執筆中に幸福感があって、やっぱりこう魂を高揚させてくれるような美しい世界について書くってことが今自分にとってもあるいは読者にとっても必要じゃないかと思って、僕にとってはそれはやっぱり音楽だなというふうに思ったんですね。で、文学も音楽も時間芸術ですから、いつも創作の中では音楽をヒントにしながら僕は書いてるところがあります。その全体の構成だとか、あるいはその楽器編成に関しても、低音から高音までいろんな楽器ありますけど、小説の中にもどういう登場人物を登場させるとアンサンブルとして美しくなるかとかっていうようなことを音楽からヒントを得ることはたくさんありますので、そういった僕自身の好みから今回は音楽を特に強調した小説になっています。
So I personally am a big fan of music as well as a player. I dabble in piano and guitar. I think aside from books, though, in my life, listening to music is what makes me the happiest. And for musicians, this is just an existence that I admire extremely. I have many different kinds of readers, but I especially appreciate when musicians tell me that they like my work. That actually means the most to me. So as I said earlier, I was a bit tired of reality. I was looking to escape reality, and I was looking to escape into a world of my liking. I actually had a previous novel where I featured characters, actual real-life characters, Chopin and Eugene Delacroix. They feature in this novel, and this was something that really brought me much happiness, and I think it was very healing for my soul to enter that world. It was something that I needed, and I think it was something that was also necessary for my readers. So again, music is something that's very, very important to me. In terms of literature, there actually are there's a lot of commonalities between the two in terms of they're both arts that you really have to feel and get a sense of. And I actually get quite a few hints from music in terms of how to compose my books. I think of it often as the different instruments that might be in an ensemble. That's how I think of my characters, who is going to compose the ensemble of my work. So I'd say I get quite a few hints from the genre of music. And I think you could describe this to the fact that it's just one of my favorite, my hobbies, or something that I really am passionate about.
So how is that for you, Juliet, translating?
Well, as you mentioned, I do have some background in music. I play some piano, and I also became interested in Japanese music. I am qualified to teach the koto and the shamisen. And I have done some singing in choruses. So music is an important part of my life, and it was a great pleasure to have this novel to translate where music is this living presence, and it makes such a difference in the lives of the people, and it's used as a way of forming bonds between people. And I think that is one of the great roles that music plays. It's not something just that you enjoy yourself, but it does bring people together. I also am interested in music because the process of performing music is actually really similar to translating words on the page. Just as if you're singing notes, you can't sing them in a monotone. You have to think about the background, who wrote this, what is the occasion, what is the genre of music, and what emotion is the music trying to express. And those things have to come through in your performance. It's not just a matter of reading the notes. And of course, that's all true for creating literature out of just words on the page. So I have a lot to think about when I think about comparing those two processes. But what helped me in this book also is that there is actually a CD which was issued that comes out with the novel. And I suppose it's available in the United States, but I would really recommend this because one of my readers said, well, surely all this music is made up. It's not invented. These. No, this is real. This is real music. Even the theme song from the movie, which is the film, which is mentioned in the book, you can listen to that music on this CD. So I would very often play that music while I was translating. And yes, it was very helpful.
So it's like woven into the text itself. So I think maybe we could have called this talk "Love and Music and Language" tonight.
Same thing.
Same thing. So Hirano-san, we were treated to a more recent talk that you've produced about some of your ideas, and you have this TED Talk that has been very popular. So readers, or not just readers, anybody can find your work through different channels. They can find the TED Talk, or they can hear about individualism, or they could happen to come across one of your books. So would you have a preference to how your audience might receive your message or your philosophy? Or like, how do you see the role of literature? Like, if you're using literature to promote these ideas, or are you using these ideas to promote your literature? Does one come first?
じゃあ僕から話します。まあ僕は基本的に小説家なので、もちろん小説を書くことが僕の仕事ですし、まあ小説を通じて僕の思想が伝わっていくってことが一番だと思いますが、小説だけじゃなくてエッセイのような形で本を書くこともあります。それはその文人っていう概念について小説の中で書いたときに、まあ非常に現状が精神的に辛くて、あるいは生きてる環境が辛くて、この本を必要としてるんだけれども、長い小説を読むほどの気力も体力もないと、精神的に非常に疲れ切ってるっていう読者が、そういう友人にも勧めたいんだけども、彼らがもっとアクセスしやすい形でその小説の中の思想をエッセイの形でまとめてくれないかっていうふうに僕に頼んできたことありました。それでその文人っていう概念はもともと小説を通じて展開してたんですけど、そういう人たちのために非常に読みやすいエッセイのそんなに分厚くない本の形でまとめて、それがすごく読まれたんですね。ですからやっぱり文学を必要としている人っていうのはたくさんいると思いますが、その人の状態によって必ずしも難しい分厚い本を読めないこともあります。ですからそういう人たちが文学にたどり着くためのいくつかのステップとしていろいろなメディアで自分の思想を語るってことは重要だと思います。でその一つが例えばエッセイのようなものであり、またテッドトークのような動画のようなものであり、ソーシャルメディアであったりといろんな形があると思いますが、でも最終的にはできれば僕の本に、小説にたどり着いてぜひ読んでもらいたいなと思います。
Well, of course, as a novelist, my books are the primary source that I was focused on. So essentially, I'm conveying these ideas through my novels. That being said, there are other forms that I have used. For example, as opposed to an actual book, I've done essays, a collection of essays. In regard to this bunjin, or individual, this I've discussed in my novels. But there was a situation where life was getting tough. There was a lot of things going on where the actual reality was tough and people wanted to escape. And they needed a book, but they didn't necessarily have the energy or the endurance to read a long, thick book. So instead, I wanted to make it more accessible for my friends who were interested in these ideas, but didn't have the necessary energy or resources to read them. So I came to the thought of putting them in essays, although I have had the bunjin or individual theory in novels as well. But essays are easier to read. I had a compilation in a slim volume, and this actually, after being published, was extremely well read. I think that there are many different people who need literature, but it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be something difficult in a very thick book. This is not something that makes it accessible for a lot of people. I think that there should be multiple steps, different forms of media that they can access this. One could be through essays. Another might be through TED Talks, videos, and then social media is also another option. But, with a variety of methods, I do have to say, being a novelist, I would hope that they would ultimately come around to reading my books.
I have so many questions I want to ask, trying to decide which order to ask them in. I think I want to switch back to Juliet. I just want to talk about, since we're talking about, what comes first, how you came to translate this book, how that came around and came about. And you've translated so many different authors across so many different forms and genres, as we're talking about. And when I say forms, you've translated poetry and, all different kinds of books. But do you have a particular approach when you start translating an author whose work you haven't translated before?
Well, the basic approach is to read the book. It's,
Surprised.
I had a question asked me once about, I had translated a mystery. It was a murder mystery. And they said, well, what if you're translating it and you come to the end of the book and you find that somebody other than who you thought was the murderer actually did the deed? I said, well, that could never happen because I would read the book first. Maybe some people do translate that way, and they can continually be surprised by what's coming as they go along, and maybe that would work. But I like to have read the book and have a picture of it in my mind and know where we're going with it. I had not read any of Hirano-san's works before, but as it happened, I believe the publisher asked me to read it, and I just couldn't find the time. But then I had to have knee surgery, and I had both knees operated on at the same time. This was in 2015, I think. And so I had the whole summer, I had weeks. It didn't take that long to read, but I was able to spend a lot of time with the book. And I actually shared it with some of the other people who were in the hospital with me, and we would talk about it. And it started from that.
So when you're finding if it's the voice or, the register or the tone, when obviously we're talking about Hirano-san's book, but when it's someone, do you ever find that like you have echoes of other authors you've translated, or does this book sort of come to you, or do you have to establish what it is? What's that process like for you? Sorry, I think we need to unmute. I think.
And I think so. You have to have an image in your mind, and sometimes I suppose in getting the voice right, it could help to have reference to a certain author that you might find echoes of. But I don't think I do that very much. I think I try to let the book speak to me directly so that I can hear the music of that book itself, and then try to recreate that. It's the voices of the characters is a different matter. I might decide this character reminds me of this person, and this person always says this, so I'm going to use that expression. I will borrow from people that I know that I'm reminded of as I read the book.
Do you tell them? You ever let them know that they're?
My husband is used to. He's a repeat offender. I don't know what people do that aren't married, because I know how he talks so well, and there are certain people that I know how they talk, and I can use what they say, or I would never use what he says. It could work the other way too. Oh, my husband would say that, so I better not use that expression. Depends on the situation.
So, Hirano-san, there are two recurring themes in the novel that I wanted to ask you about specifically, some of which resonate from the talk that was shown at the beginning of this, and then the TED Talk as well. It's the notion of the self, who you are in any given relationship with someone else. Like Makino talks a lot about the self that he is when he's with Yoko. And so there's that. And then the concept that I think is really interesting to a lot of people is the idea of the past being subject to change. So can you say more about these?
はい。まあ、最初の方の、文人っていう概念に関係する、その、個人の内的な多様性っていう話ですけども、これはビデオでも説明した通りなんですが、僕自身がアイデンティティについて10代の時からずっと悩んでまして、一つは、やっぱり対人関係ごとにいろんな人と接してると、どうしてもいろんな自分になってしまうけれども、学校なんかでは自分らしく、自分の個性を大事にしなさいってことを言われていて、他者との関係の中で自分がすごく変わっていくってことをネガティブに感じていたんですね。本当の自分っていうのが自分にはないんじゃないかと。それからもう一つは、職業を選択するっていうことにおいて、日本では一つの職業をすると大体長く40年ぐらい続けるってことは一般的だったので、職業を選ぶ前に自分は一体本当はどういう人間なのかっていうのを一つに見定めないといけないっていうことを10代の時にすごく言われるんですね。ところがなかなか考えても本当の自分っていうのはわからないんですね。で、実際にはやっぱりコミュニケーションの中で分化していくいろんな自分っていうのが、全て本当の自分だというふうに捉えて、その中でこそさっきのビデオでも言ったように、肯定的な自分と否定的な自分っていうのを相対化して、じゃあどういう環境だったら自分は生きやすいかってことを自分なりにコントロールしていくことができるんじゃないかっていうふうに考えるようになったんですね。で、小説はやっぱりそれぞれの登場人物がどういう人かっていうことを明確にしたいので、どうしても一本調子な人物になりがちなんですね。だけど僕はこのマチネの終わりにという小説では、あえて例えば陽子っていう女性は、イラクに取材に行っている時の彼女、ニューヨークで夫と暮らしている時の彼女、長崎で母親といる時の彼女、それから牧野と一緒にいる時の彼女っていうふうに、それぞれの彼女の人格っていうのをかなり描き分けたんですね。で、そうすると結果として読者がなんかこの人は多重人格でバラバラな人間だっていうふうに思ったかっていうとそうではなくて、やっぱりその状況ごとに変化していく彼女を見ながら、非常に人間的な彼女の一つの個性っていうのを発見していたんですね。ですからこの考え方は僕が小説の登場人物を書くときにもかなり意識している人間観になっています。まず最初の質問そこまでお願いします。
I'm going to start with the individual part. As I mentioned during my video, there are many different versions of who we are. And for me, this seed was planted probably in my teens. I've been thinking a lot about my identity. This was something that was a bit of a concern for me because there were many different versions of myself. So when I went to school, people were always saying that you have to know yourself and recognize your personality. I actually took that in a bit more negative way because I thought that if my personality is different depending on the situation or the person I'm with, then who am I? I'm not me. Another aspect is careers in Japan. When you go into a certain field for a career, you're expected to remain in that career for the majority of your life. So before choosing, you would have to think, what kind of person am I? And you're supposed to do this self-examination at an early age, let's say in your teens, before entering your future career. This is something that I think even if you think about, you're not going to really understand or come to a conclusion at that age. Because there's different aspects of you and they all comprise who you are. I mentioned this in the video as well, but we mentioned the concepts of self-affirmation and then self-negation. I think it's a matter of compiling these aspects and putting them together. And you really want to create the best environment for yourself where you can create the optimal version of yourself. This really is what we should strive to do as humans. In terms of my novels, for my characters, I really would like to depict them pretty clearly. But that being said, that can be a boring approach to writing. Let me give you an example with Yoko. We have many different versions of her. We have her stint in Iraq. We have the way she is in New York with her husband. We have the Yoko who is in Nagasaki with her mother. And then we also have Yoko and Makino. So these are several different versions of her. You might think I'm creating someone with multiple personalities. This is not the case, though. I really was able to discover her personality via all these different relationships. So this concept is something I'm also very aware of as I'm writing characters in my novels.
で、2つ目の質問なんですけども、その過去は変えられるってことなんですが、その日本では、他の国では分かりませんけど、通俗的に解釈されたフロイトのトラウマ説のようなものが非常に広まっていて、自分は過去にこういうことがあったから現在はこうなんだと。で、現在の自分はこうであるのは過去にこういうことがあったからなんだっていうふうに、過去と現在との因果関係の中に閉じ込められてしまって、なかなか人生を前に進めることができないっていう、 友人、知人を、たくさん見てきたんですね。だけど、過去っていうのはそんなに本当にクリアな安定したものなのかっていうと、必ずしもそうではないと思うんですね。大人になって出来事の見え方が変わるとか、あるいは子供の時には知らなかった情報をある時に告げられて、あれはそういうことだったのかっていうふうに分かるとか、そうすると認識が変われば、僕たちが過去にしている意味付けっていうのは非常に大きく変わって、それは過去の体験自体を変化させるものだと思うんですね。で、これは個人にとっては非常にポジティブな面もありますけど、例えば社会の中では、日本では今、歴史修正主義っていうのは非常に問題になっていて、日本の、第二次大戦の時に行った、様々な侵略その他悪いことを、その修正主義的に美化しようとするっていうのは動きがありますね。それに対して歴史学者はいつも抵抗してるわけですが、その歴史っていうものも必ずしも安定的なものではないわけですね。ですから、正しい正当な歴史学の中で新しい発見が起きて、僕たちが信じていた過去とは違った過去っていうのが今共有されているってこともありますが、悪意を持って歴史を改変しようとする動きっていうのも同時にあるわけですね。ですから根本にあるのは、過去そのものが僕たちにとってはそれほど安定的なものではないと。でその上で、それが個人にとってはポジティブに作用することもあるし、社会的にはネガティブな問題となることもある。で、この小説の中では、しかし個人にとって、それがポジティブな意味を持つときっていうことを、強調して書いたつもりです。
In regard to the second question about changing the past, this is something that in Japan, we actually had a large focus on Freud's trauma theory, this being that what happened in your past determines your present as well as your future, or conversely, you are this way because of what happened in your past. This cause and effect is something that's deeply embedded, and it's something that I've seen hinder a lot of my friends and acquaintances from moving forward. I don't think that the past is something that is so clear or so stable. What I mean to say is that as adults, we might think of something as a certain way, but let's say we receive new information that we did not have as a child. This would again change our vision of what that past had been. So by changing your perception or your understanding, the past could change as well greatly, and your actual experience as well could change. This can be taken on the positive side for individuals, but there's also a more malicious aspect to it. In Japan, we've been wrestling with some historical issues in terms of what transpired during World War II with other countries, invasions, other aspects. There's been a movement towards a revisionist history model. And this is actually opposed by many historians. I would argue that history itself is similarly not stable, meaning that as you receive new information or things that were not uncovered being discovered, this could change the historical past as well. But again, this is something that can be positive, but there are also people looking to have a revisionist version of history. It can also be used in malicious ways. But again, the root of my concept is that the past is not stable, it can change, and it can affect society positively or negatively. In terms of my novel, we're looking at these individual circumstances, and I try to emphasize the positive aspect of that changeability.
There's a question from the audience that kind of overlaps with what you were just saying. So I am going to try and start bringing some of those questions in. This is from the beginning video. You spoke, this is you to Hirano-san, you spoke on your concept of the individual. How or do you think the concept of the individual is harmful to interpersonal relationships?
もともとは先ほどのビデオでも言ったように自己肯定と自己否定の問題を考えるときに非常にこのことを考えたんですね。というのは、日本では自殺率が非常に高くて、特に若い人の自殺っていうのは深刻な問題になっています。で、そういうときに、例えば若い10代の子が自殺してしまった後にリサーチすると、学校では非常に深刻ないじめを受けていたと。だけど家庭で母親と過ごしていた時には非常に明るくて、全くそんな苦しんでる様子は見えなかったっていうんですね。で、亡くなった後、母親は学校でいじめられたことに気づいてあげられなかったことに非常に強いショックを受けるわけですが、その時にもしその人が自分っていうのをいくつかの状況ごとに複数の自分を生きていると。そして本当に辛いのは学校にいる時の自分であって、 母親といる時の自分っていうのは必ずしも辛くないんだっていうことを相対的に理解することができればですね、じゃあその学校での文人っていうのをどうするか、その学校を辞めるか、しばらく学校に行くのをやめるかっていうことを具体的に考えることができるわけですけど、その切れ目なく全体として自分っていうのを考えようとすると、学校で経験した嫌な気持ちっていうのが一日中自分の中にずっと他の人と会う時にも、広がってしまうと。で、その問題を対処しようとしても全部全部の問題として考えてしまうので、悪い場合には自分に本質的に何か人から嫌われるようなものがあるんじゃないか。自分が何かこう、自分自身の問題なんじゃないかっていうふうに自分を責めるようなことを考えてしまって、自分を傷つけたりとかっていうような行動に移ってしまうことがあると。そういう状況を考えていったときに、やっぱり対人関係ごとに人間っていうのは変化していくってことを、一つの現象として理解する必要があるんじゃないかと思ったんですね。ただ、人間っていうのはもう細胞のレベルからこう社会のレベルまで非常に複数のレイヤーの中で生きてますから、法システムとかっていうのはやっぱり今でも個人っていう概念に基づいて、運用されてるって思いますけど、その下で個人のコミュニケーションの次元では、インディビジュアルっていう概念があまりにも大きすぎて、むしろそれよりも細かな関係性ごとの、単位っていうのを設定しないと、僕たちが日常生活でコミュニケーションを送っている状況っていうのをうまく分析できないんじゃないかと思ったんですね。ですから、分析単位として個人よりも一つ小さな単位っていうのを導入する必要があるって考えたのが、発端でした。
This was actually mentioned in the video. I mentioned before as well the concepts of self-affirmation and negation. In Japan, we actually have quite a high suicide rate, and it's especially high for young people. In their teens, there's a large phenomenon of suicide. After this happens, a lot of research is done, let's say at the student's school, and often they uncovered that they were undergoing a lot of harassment or bullying. It was very severe, but the person's mother, said that they were very happy at home, and the mother had no idea this was happening. She didn't see it in her child, and she's in a state of shock because it was something that she wasn't able to notice for her child. In thinking about this, I was thinking that there's more than, it's again the concept of multiple people. The individual, the person or the bunjin at school is in a very difficult position, but when they were home with their mother, that was a relatively happy place for them. You have to think about it in these relative terms. If you thought about it this way, then you can think about it as the individual who is at school. Well, then maybe they should quit school, or maybe they should not go to school for a while. That would be a solution to that problem. Unfortunately, though, you can't divide the individuals as easily, because let's say the person's problem is that they go to school, they are bullied, and this stays with them all day. It's something that affects them. It spills into other parts of their life. In a worst case scenario, they would start thinking that the problem is with themselves, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, and they blame themselves for the situation that they're in. So when we think about these relationships with other people, they can change us, and they change who we are. They create our individuals. This is a phenomenon I think that we need to understand. When we think about the how society is composed, starting from the cellular level all the way up to the societal level, the people are composed. We're in cellular level all the way up to the societal level. There's many different layers. When we think about the legal aspect, let's say on a legal level, the individual is where that's where the unit takes place. But if we think about interpersonal relationships and communication, I don't think the individual is enough. It's too big. It's a little bit too sprawling. I think we need to narrow down this unit. We need to have a more relative unit that's smaller in size to really have effective communication in life. Otherwise, I think analysis is very difficult. So we need to break down this individual, at least on the communication level.
These are very complicated ideas, I think. Juliet, this is another question from the audience. Can you talk about any special challenges you recall in translating this novel? And the person in the audience was wondering if you might compare this with Abe's novels. But I always, when someone asks about the special challenges, I also like to ask about, the sort of special joys or the special fun that you had.
There's always some of both. It almost doesn't matter which, what novel you're working on. What was challenging about this novel in particular is the level of detail about financial matters that I really, I knew vaguely, but I really had to delve into those. Plus European history, and of course the music. There was just it was intellectually challenging in that sense. Also, this doesn't get talked about much, but Makino has a sense of humor, and he expresses himself by telling funny stories. And I think one of the hardest things in translating is to translate humor. So I worked on those to make them as genuinely appealing and humorous as I could. But I think humor is something universal, and yet there are subtle differences in what we find humorous. But the war situation, and Jalila is a character in there, and bringing her to life, she stands out. She's a little bit different from everybody else in the novel. So I guess my greatest pleasure was in meeting those different challenges and trying to bring the different people to life.
Well, I think you succeeded very well in bringing the humorous stories, because the Makino stories were hilarious. I mean, I read this book in your translation, and one in particular, I think I was like, I had an audible. I was, reading in bed next to my husband, and I was like, I read it, and he was like, what happened? So anyway, I won't spoil it. I want people to go and read it for themselves. But were there any comparisons with Abe's books? Would you?
Also, he builds things up as a sort of there's a certain philosophical architecture to his works, and I think there's something similar. There. I translated 2 novels by Abe and a set of short stories. So I started out; those were the very first things that I ever translated. So I think the lessons that I learned from Abe, they're imprinted in me, and I carry them over into really whatever else I do. But I think the having that architecture of an idea that permeates the novel is something that was familiar to me from my work with Abe.
Well, those are wonderful echoes and resonances to have imprinted upon you from the beginning. There are questions about whether Hirano-san's other works will be published in English. Juliet, are you translating those? Or also about the essays? Are there plans for the essays about individualism? Were they going to be translated? Or maybe I should ask if the publisher is here.
Yeah. Do you have someone there?
I don't know. We can't see.
Oh.
So this is just do you have plans?
Well, his most recent novel, I believe it was just published in Japan, is called Honshin, which is True Feelings, and it's about it's about AI, artificial intelligence, and a young man who is trying to replace his mother with what they call a virtual friend. And I'm reading that now. We'll see what happens.
ぜひ機会があったらもっと他の作品も皆さんに読んでもらいたいと思いますんで、僕の本を気に入ってくださった方は出版社にもっと本出してって言ってください。そしたら心が動かされるかもしれません。
I'd love to have other readers to have the opportunity to read my books. So if you liked what you read in this one, please let my publisher know, and perhaps this will move them to start working on my other books as well in English.
I think they're pretty responsive. So, we have about 5 minutes left in this event. So I think I have the last question here from the audience for Hirano-san. Are there additional thinkers and writers who haven't been mentioned or that weren't mentioned in your book or the talk who have influenced your philosophy in writing?
そうですね、ものすごくたくさんいるので、選ぶのは難しいんですけど、まあ、アメリカ文学だったら僕はエドガー・アラン・ポーとホーソン、それからメルビル、まあ、あの時代の作家のものにすごく影響を受けました。で、それから、まあ、あとはまあ、19世紀から20世紀初頭のヨーロッパの文学に僕はやっぱり影響を受けたので、まあ、ボードレールっていう詩人は、まあ、詩人としても評論家としても、批評家としても非常に尊敬してますし、まあ、トルストイやドストエフスキーといった、まあ、19世紀の大作家のものが、やっぱり僕の教養の母体になっているような気がしますね。まあ、一方で、まあ、最近は韓国人の女性作家のハンガンさんの作品を読んで非常に、感動しましたし、まあ、その時々によって、いろいろこう自分が心を動かせる作品も、違っていますので、そうですね。まあ、いろいろですね。
Really, there's so many, it's hard to even narrow them down to give you examples. But if we're talking about American authors, I would have to cite Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, Melville, writers of that generation. I was also greatly influenced by 19th to 20th century European literature. There was a poet and he also did, he was also a critic. Baudelaire, was that the name? And then there were other cultural influences, Dostoevsky as well, that representative of the 19th century. More modern writers, I'd say, are there's a Korean author I love, Hangan, I believe was her name. But it really depends on the time, where I am, really what's moving me. But there's really too many to illustrate here.
I think it's about time to wrap up. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to answer all of the questions. But I'd like to thank Hirano-san for joining us and Juliet for being here and to engage in this conversation, and Stacy, of course. It was amazing to have you. I'd like to thank the captioners, and I'd like to thank PEN America for inviting me to moderate this conversation in World Voices Festival. And I'd like to thank Japan Foundation Los Angeles for making this possible. If you have, there are many other events going on this week, so I hope that you will find them. And I know that they're going to be available on the replay in the near future as well. So thank you very much for being here, and look forward to seeing you again.